This is the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce's Presidential Candidate Series on business, an unbiased and informative interview series featuring the U.S. presidential candidates and their vision for the future of America. Business, economy, trade, entrepreneurship. We ask all the questions so you can make an informed decision in 2024.
Well, good morning and welcome on behalf of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce. My name is Gentry Collins. I'm the CEO of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce. And the AmFree Chamber is an organization that's committed to the idea that free people and competitive markets have done more to lift the human condition than any other governing or economic set of ideas in all of recorded history. You know, we've had thousands of years of recorded history, just one American century. And in that American century, we more than doubled global human life expectancy. And for the first time in recorded history, we'll lose more of our poor now to diseases of excess than diseases of deprivation. That the human flourishing, the peace and the plenty that are driven only by American ideas and only by American free enterprise have been the great force for human flourishing in all recorded history. And yet, we're facing real threats to the idea that we ought to have another American century. The next president of the United States is going to have to take on the fact that more young people, more young Americans now say that it's time to flirt with something else. Our view at AmFree Chamber is that we ought to open another American century as the only way to the kind of human flourishing that we saw in the last American century. It's time for another one. Never has that been more in question. The next president has a big job ahead of him. Before we get into it, I want to highlight one of the great success stories in American free enterprise, and it's the location we're at today. The Reeder family, and I want to thank Todd Reeder. I want to thank Chris Vollweiler. Chris, thank you for stopping work here today and taking a little pause in the economic vitality that you drive and that your company drives. Family business has been around for more than 70 years, half a dozen locations around the state of Iowa, 130 plus employees, and a real success story that's only possible when you believe in the American dream. We're thrilled to be here and thrilled to have you here, Governor. The chairman of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce, for whom I have the privilege and honor of working on a regular basis, here to introduce our guest, the longest serving governor in America's history, followed by service to the country as U.S. ambassador to China, and as governor, if I might say, was a real force in growing and diversifying Iowa's economy and became a real example for other governors around the country about how the power of American free enterprise can lift the people of a state and the people of a country. With that, it is my privilege to introduce Governor Terry Branstad.
Well, thank you, Gentry Collins, for that very nice introduction. I, too, want to thank the Reeder Company for hosting us in this facility, and you can see some of the great equipment that they provide for farmers and cattle feeders here in Iowa and Nebraska. I have the honor of introducing Asa Hutchinson, who served as the governor of Arkansas from 2015 to 2023. I had two stints as governor. And on my second stint as governor, I came back, and one of the honors that I had was hosting the National Governors Conference in 2016. And Asa Hutchinson was one of those governors that came and shared with us some of the innovative things that he was doing in Arkansas to improve educational opportunities for the young people. He has served in many different capacities. He served in the Congress, was appointed by President Bush as administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration. He also was appointed as Undersecretary for Border and Transportation Security in the newly established Department of Homeland Security. And he worked with my good friend Susan Neely, who was my first press secretary, and she also was appointed by President Bush to that new agency. And I know they've been longstanding friends, and of course, I'm very honored and very proud to introduce Asa Hutchinson, one of the presidential candidates, and a distinguished former governor who has a great record of attracting jobs and improving education in the great state of Arkansas.
Thank you, Governor Branstad, and Terry, it's an honor to be with you again. And Gentry, thank you for your leadership on free enterprise issues. And, you know, coming from Arkansas and northwest part of the state, free enterprise made all the difference for our community, our state. And I referenced three individuals. One was Sam Walton, another was Don Tyson, and another was J.B. Hunt. Three individuals that sort of grew up in the same generation and entrepreneurs. They started small businesses. Don Tyson hauling chickens from Springdale up to Chicago. And of course, it's turned into a global enterprise. And similarly, Sam Walton, when I started practicing law in Bentonville, Sam Walton was there building his stores, and I got to know him. I got to watch his success, and it just really boils down to the opportunities in America to start a business, to have an idea, and to pursue that and take the risk associated with it and have success. Through that, you create jobs. You are able to enjoy the fruit of your labors, which would be building what we see today as global businesses. And I've had my own experiences in business as well, so which I'd love to talk about. I like what you're doing in terms of free enterprise, the emphasis on that. It is critical to the future of our country, and every generation needs to understand the importance of it.
One of the starting points for us is that we see that young people in America really no longer believe or have never been told of the power of American free enterprise to lift people up. And as a result, they're looking elsewhere. You know, we've got something like 40% of next generation American consumers who are flirting with various forms of socialism. As president, let me ask, how would you use the bully pulpit to explain the power of free enterprise and reinvigorate faith in the free enterprise system?
Well, I would do that, and it's stories of success. Just like we honor our heroes in the military, we need to honor our heroes in business as well. The stories of Americans who start with an idea, they put all at risk, and sometimes they fail in the pursuit of that. But those that have achieved that success are representative of our dreams. And whenever you look at the challenges that we face, it's an incredible statistic, but 90% of the population in North America is governed by a left-of-center political leader. Now, that's moving toward government, moving toward socialism, and that is a concern whenever you have that emphasis. So we have a responsibility to the next generation to lift them up, to showcase how important it is. And we did that in Arkansas. We had programs that taught free enterprise, taught business in the schools. We celebrated it. We had competitions to showcase the free enterprise system and business acumen, where the schools competed with each other at the college level, at the high school level. And so you've got to make sure we instill that appreciation for the free enterprise system.
I want to add maybe a little story about one of your Arkansas entrepreneurs that I got to know, named Sam Walton. When I was a brand new governor in 1983, I had never heard of Walmart or Sam Walton, and the economic development people in Iowa said, there's a big retailer down south and they're coming into the Midwest. They're looking to build a distribution center, and they've been looking in northern Missouri and in western Illinois. Would you make a cold call on a guy named Sam Walton? So one evening in January, my first month as governor, I made a cold call on Sam Walton. I said, I'm Terry Branstad, the new governor of Iowa. We're a right-to-work state like Arkansas, and we understand you've been looking at sites in Missouri and north and western Illinois. We'd like you to look at some sites in Iowa. He interrupted me. He says, don't call me Mr. Walton. I want to be called Sam. I know all about Iowa. I worked in the basement of the penny store in Des Moines. Brother Bud worked for Pennies in Cedar Rapids. We'd be glad to come up and look at some of your sites. Lo and behold, he flies himself up here. We show him several sites. You get to Mount Pleasant. Ernie Hayes, kind of the godfather of economic development in Iowa. He and Sam hit it off, and Sam Walton says, we're going to build the distribution center in Mount Pleasant. They flew back to Bentonville, invited us to come down and see the distribution center there and go quail hunting with him and Brother Bud, which we did. So this is the kind of entrepreneur who made a real difference, and he was such a down-to-earth guy that was so good at schmoozing with the customers that I could see why he was so successful. And that tells you a lot about what the free enterprise system can do, and things like the right to work law, which you have in Arkansas and we have in Iowa, and that's made a lot of difference in attracting good jobs to our states.
One of the reasons that we see when we talk to our small business members that they locate businesses in places like Iowa and places like Arkansas is affordability, cost of living concerns. And of course, that's been more on voters' minds than we like with rates of inflation. The American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce recently did a survey that found that 79% of American households say that cost of living inflation is a major concern in their own household budgets. The next president's going to have to address these issues. Governor, how would your administration take on these high rates of inflation in America today?
Well, you've got to get them down. You got to stop it. And of course, I remember whenever Ronald Reagan was elected, we had the inflationary times of Jimmy Carter and high interest rates as well. And we're almost repeating that cycle today. And not only do you have inflationary pressures on our families and I talked to people yesterday in the stores. I asked them what their issues are, and just like you said, it's the price of milk. You know, one mom, single mom, had 4 children, and she's talked about how much milk they drink and how much it costs her. And so, and it's for small businesses as well, the cost of goods. So what's the reason we have inflation today? And it's because this administration has printed money like there's no end to it. And they're printing money in Washington that's flooding our American system, and that has put pressure on the prices that go up. You combine that with some supply chain challenges coming out of the pandemic. And so both of those add to inflationary cost. And what you've got to do is to rein in federal spending, to showcase the Federal Reserve. You don't need to raise the interest rates. We're going to control the inflation by reining in federal spending. We're spending too much, particularly when it comes to the last the Inflation Reduction Act. Is $1.2 trillion. That flooded our system, and the cost of goods went up, and it's hurt our businesses and hurt our families. That's the fundamental thing. You know, in addition, of course, on the supply chain side, you've got to make sure that we're able to move some of our manufacturing away from areas in which we can't rely upon the supply chain. It can get disrupted, and that's what restrains the supply of goods, raises the cost of them, the demand increases, and that's the result of inflation. We're paying the price for it today.
Governor Branstad, I'd like to come to you as former ambassador to China. There are concerns, of course, as Governor Hutchinson has raised, about global supply chain, security of the global supply chain across the board. What did you see as ambassador to China that represent vulnerabilities in our supply chain, and how can a governor like Asa Hutchinson as president address those for the American people?
Well, of course, I was the ambassador when COVID started in Wuhan, China. And we then, and of course, they had a big Chinese New Year celebration, which was attended by tens of thousands of people, and then they went all over the world, and it became a worldwide pandemic. And it affected us here in the United States and all over the world. And we were starting to recognize a shortage of of medical supplies, of PPE and things like that. And one of the things we did is I think over 50 plane loads of PPE and medical supplies we were able to get. For instance, 3M had a plant in Shanghai that made these masks, and we had a desperate shortage of those, and we were able to get those back. But one of the things we really found is we were too dependent on China for pharmaceuticals. And that's one of the things that we need to do in the United States, is bring the pharmaceutical manufacturing back to this country. And that's just one of the areas where we really need a presidential leadership that's going to recognize that we need to focus on American jobs and having these critical supplies that American consumers need made in America, so we don't have to worry about interruption of supply chains like we saw during the COVID pandemic.
Terry, you're right on target, and I remember seeing you as ambassador there in China. Incredible job that you did there under very difficult times. But I also, as governor during that time, remember having to order PPE, personal protective equipment, from China and reserve time on the factory floor in China. And then I get a call right before they start production and say, you've been outbid by New York. And so we're bumped again. Governors should not be in that position. I never thought we'd have to compete for production time on a factory floor in China. And so we've got to, on those sensitive industries, return that to the United States, starting with our pharmaceutical, our healthcare products. And then also, our military supplies should not be dependent upon China. That needs to be returned to the United States. And those things will help us to have more reliable supply chains in the sensitive industries. Obviously, whenever you're looking at consumer goods, there's some candidates out there that advocate we ought to just have a total breakout and isolate ourselves from China, the second leading economy of the world. And I don't think that's wise. That would add to the inflationary costs for our consumers. Europe wouldn't follow our leadership on that because they're dependent upon that trade. So we got to be smart whenever you're looking at moving that supply chain. We've got to do that in those sensitive industries that I mentioned.
Plus, the Chinese people appreciate the safety and quality of American food, and we, agricultural Midwest, depend on China as a major export market for soybeans, corn, and now we got it reopened for beef and chicken, and that's critically important. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. We don't want to totally decouple. We want to make sure that in those critical areas, we are producing it here in America, but we also recognize that it's a world economy, and we need to be able to sell our products into China and other countries in the world.
Yeah, I remember you being very excited whenever American beef started coming back to China. You enjoyed that as ambassador.
Governor, we talked about, as part of the supply chain matter, we talked about pharmaceuticals it being produced in places that we don't control. One of the things we hear from our members now, staying on the healthcare theme, is that small businesses are struggling to keep up with the rising cost of health insurance. And they want to provide good benefits, they want to cover good benefits, including good drug plans, and yet it is harder and harder and harder to do so. We're entering, I think, a second decade now of Obamacare, and yet we're still struggling with these healthcare costs. How would a Hutchinson administration deal with rising healthcare costs in America?
A big part of the key is giving more flexibility to the states. Governor Reynolds needs more flexibility in managing the Medicaid program. And whenever you do that, that helps to control cost. For example, in Arkansas, I asked the administration for ability to have a work requirement for able-bodied Medicaid recipients. Those that are able to work, they either need to be working or in training to get a better job if they're going to receive those Medicaid benefits. Well, the Biden administration struck that down and said, no, you can't do that. As president, I will give governors more flexibility to manage healthcare programs, and that helps to control cost in and of itself. Secondly, there'll be a continued debate as to whether we want to have a one-payer system where the government takes it all. That takes competition out. That takes options out for the consumer, and we need to value the fact that we have multiple insurance providers, that we have different healthcare providers, because that helps us to compete with cost and to keep cost from rising so fast. So competition, consumer choices, and making sure that there's flexibility in managing those Medicaid dollars that are so important in the delivery of health care to much of America. In Arkansas, we did something unique that helped the small businesses. We expanded the insurance market pool to keep costs down. And so a Medicaid recipient would not just get a fee for service, but they would actually get an insurance card paid for by Medicaid dollars. But that meant there were more people in the insurance pool that drove costs down. And that's been a benefit to our Arkansas consumer.
One of the issues that we hear from our small employers is about the cost of prescription drugs and prescription drug coverage and the rates of increases we've seen. And so at AmFree Chamber, we started looking at what can be done in order to help our small businesses. And we ran into this matter of pharmacy benefit managers. Pharmacy benefit managers, we understand, take more than 50% of the retail price of a prescription drug in America today. That doesn't go to the pharmaceutical manufacturer. It doesn't go to the pharmacist that's dispensing the drug to you. And they're doing that by doing things like retaining rebates from the drug companies that were intended for the consumer. The Biden administration has proposed price controls, essentially. The free enterprise perspective, I guess, would be something more along the lines of transparency and competition in that marketplace. Where do you come down on the drug pricing debate?
Well, that's where we get in conflict a little bit with the free market system and the capitalist system in America. But we just got to apply rules. For example, with the pharmacy benefit managers that have hurt our local pharmacists, that have kept the prices of the consumers from getting the benefit of lower drug costs. What we did in Arkansas was that we passed the first regulatory environment for PBMs, in which we required the transparency. That was the key thing, transparency, but also to have to be answerable to our insurance commission that they are passing along the benefits to the consumer and making sure that there is that transparency. That was challenged, and it went to the United States Supreme Court, and the PBM legislation that I signed into law in Arkansas was upheld. It continues to be a model for different states.
Yes.
And so that, I think, is something that we can do, that we did in Arkansas and should work.
What we've just heard from Governor Asa Hutchinson is an example why having a president that served as governor makes a lot of sense, because you're the chief executive of the state. You've had to make these tough decisions and sometimes had to battle to make sure that it was implemented all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's something we don't have today. And if you look back, we had Ronald Reagan with the gubernatorial experience. And I think that kind of experience is a good training ground for somebody that wants to be president.
I happen to agree with you. I think governors have historically, they're executives, they know how to lead, they know how to cut through bureaucracy, They know how to get things done, and that's what we need as a president, somebody who's had that experience.
And Governor Branstad, if I may come back to you, as governor, one of the things that you did in this state was to diversify and grow the economy, that we stayed true to our agricultural roots, but found ways to grow out of the farm crisis of the 80s and to secure the kind of prosperity that we have today. Let me ask, as we get into this question of liquid fuels and the future of the internal combustion engine, which is so important to the way we move people and goods in this country, but uniquely important to Iowa. You helped grow the renewable fuels industry here in Iowa. It's now under threat. Can you comment on that?
Well, first of all, in growing the renewable fuels and adding value to agriculture, we made some strategic decisions. We got rid of the tax on machinery and equipment. The equipment that builds these wonderful machines was being taxed annually on property tax. We got rid of that. And then we also made a concerted effort to attract renewables, ethanol, biodiesel, and of course, when you produce ethanol, you also get DDGs, which is great cattle feed. We're right next to Nebraska, the leading cattle feeding state in the country, and this DDGs, which is high in protein, is better than just feeding corn to your cattle. And so it's critically important that we preserve that. Today, over half of the corn we raise in Iowa goes into ethanol and then byproducts of DDGs and corn oil. And of course, we're also working now on capturing the carbon dioxide, sequestering that, and in the process, becoming reducing carbon in the environment. And that is going to make it better for the environment than electric vehicles. And so that is something that I think is critically important. But yet this administration, the Biden administration, is pushing the extreme agenda of eliminating the internal combustion engine. With that would not only would go away all liquid fuel, not just petroleum, but renewables like ethanol and biodiesel as well. And that would be devastating to the jobs in Iowa and in the ethanol and biodiesel plants that we have, but also to the income of Iowa farmers. So this is something that is critically important, and it's a threat we are facing right now. States like California, which seems to be clueless about this, I don't know how their grid system would be able to handle what they're advocating, but they're trying to eliminate the internal combustion engine, and the Biden administration is pushing for it on a nationwide basis. That would be disastrous, and that's something that we need a president that understands the need to have all kinds of energy sources, including renewables and petroleum.
Well, first of all, whenever you look at the push toward electric vehicles, we want that option for consumers, but we don't want to have it forcibly driven to the extent that we cannot manage the electrical grid. And whenever you look at California that have pushed toward the electric vehicles, then they had brownouts and they told everybody to make sure you don't plug in your vehicles. And so they're dependent upon the production of energy. And we do not need to have a country that has dominated by brownouts or blackouts. We have to produce energy. And I have to express my disagreement with President Biden's decision this week to stop the leases from being issued and operated on in the Alaskan tundra, in which we are looking to as an opportunity to produce more energy for our country. And his prohibition, his moratorium on those leases and the development of energy in that area of the country that we have resources for it is simply wrong and bad for America. You look at this behind us in these vehicles here. These are combustion engines, and they are needed for farming. You will hurt farming if you have an artificial deadline that requires the end of combustion engines. And so we need to produce energy in this country, and part of that, of course, would be the biofuels that's produced, the ethanol that is important here in Iowa that would have the benefit from it. The consumers will direct the future of this, and technology will, but we need to produce energy in this country.
So as you might imagine, our members, small and mid-sized business members, deeply concerned with the provisions of the tax code that will expire in 2025. The next president will deal with this matter. Where are you on renewal of the so-called Trump tax cuts? How would you bring Congress along with you? And maybe more broadly, what does a President Hutchinson envision in terms of tax policy going forward that makes America competitive and as fair and affordable for all of us?
We need a pro-growth tax policy, just like we need a pro-growth energy policy in our country. We need to spur the growth of the private sector, and you cannot do that without good incentives for them in terms of taxation, but also in terms of energy. In Arkansas, we had a 7% individual income tax rate when I became governor, and we had a high corporate income tax rate. We lowered the individual income tax rate from 7% down to 4.9%, $700 million a year going from the state coffers into individual taxpayers. That's what we have to do to grow our economy. When you look at the Jobs Act, the Tax Reduction and Jobs Act that will come up for renewal in 2025, I believe it is, that needs to be renewed. Now, we can look at it to see if there's some fairness and some adjustments that need to be made. But for example, how important it is to renew it is the accelerated depreciation of assets and equipment. And that helps our small businesses. That spurs them to not just take the money home, but to be able to invest in more equipment, to expand and create more jobs. So it's an economic engine whenever you have that right tax policy. That will cost, I believe, over $3 trillion in order to extend those tax cuts, but it's important for our economic growth, and we'll have to look for other ways to offset the cost and the burden on our deficit.
As you think about that tax policy, the other matter, of course, that comes up is that we now are $32 trillion in debt, more than 100% of GDP, and growing rapidly. There are some very frightening projections that I'm sure you know better than I about where we'll be in 10 or 15 or 20 years if we don't get ahead of it. As president, how do you deal with the debt that this country faces? And let me ask you to comment also, if you would, on how you bring the Congress along with you. Divided Congress, almost regardless of what this election looks like, will be a closely divided Congress.
It will be challenging depending upon the makeup of the Congress. Obviously, if you have conservative legislators that understand the importance of a balanced budget, then it makes it easier. If they just simply want to spend, then it makes it more challenging, and you have to use a veto pen, and you have to use the power of the presidency. And I will use both of those. In Arkansas, as a governor, as Terry points out, we have to balance budgets. I balanced the budget for 8 years in a row in Arkansas. It's required under our Constitution, but we also had to tighten the belt in order to accomplish that. And so you take the mindset, first of all, to Washington that we need to move toward a balanced budget and control spending. And then you do some specific things to send the right signal. One, I will have a 10% reduction of the federal non-defense workforce. That's going to set an example. We're going to tighten the belt. Secondly, you submit a budget to Congress on time so they can start their work on time and actually do their work in passing appropriation bills that meet those budget requirements. And then you got to tackle, like I said, Medicaid with more flexibility of state to control those costs. When it comes to Medicare and Social Security, as president, I will set up a commission for the future of Social Security and Medicare that will look at what we need to do in a bipartisan way to bring Congress along to make the reforms needed for those important programs that they will last on into the future, and our senior citizens rely upon that, and the next generation as well. That's something that Ronald Reagan did in 1983. I'll repeat those steps on those two entitlement programs.
So as you get spending under control, then the other component, of course, is economic growth. You talked about that when you talked about tax policy. How do you think about those working together, and what needs to happen in order to have a truly pro-growth mindset in American public policy?
And that's the fundamental point. You've got to change the mindset. I had to change the mindset in Arkansas that we couldn't lower taxes. And I had one fundamental message, and that was I want to see the private sector of our economy grow faster than the government sector of our economy. And I'm going to take that same message to Washington, and it's about recruiting industry, bringing them back from unstable environments overseas, bringing them back to the United States. In Arkansas, I recruited the steel industry. It was a $3 billion investment of a state-of-the-art steel plant. Whenever that is built, we will pass Pennsylvania as the #1 steel producing state in the nation. And that creates
Arkansas will surpass.
Arkansas will pass Pennsylvania as the #1 steel producing state in the nation.
That is quite an accomplishment.
And U.S. Steel came to Arkansas, and we already had the steel industry, but they came to build this plant. I asked David Burritt, why did you choose Arkansas? Because we had to compete, just like Governor Branstad had to compete with other states. And he said, the ease of doing business in Arkansas, as well as the logistics that are there, but it was the ease of doing business. And he actually said that you will permit this plant, build a plant, and we will open it for business before we could ever get a permit in Pennsylvania.
And that is the power of governors in this country. Governor Branstad, of course, famously helped bring the insurance industry from the East Coast to here to Iowa.
And we brought IPSCO Steel also to the state. We had to get rid of the property tax on machinery and equipment to get IPSCO Steel. But not only helped them, but it also helped all these ethanol and biodiesel plants and other capital-intensive manufacturing, fertilizer plants and others that we've attracted to the state. So that's critically important. Tax policy makes a difference. Being a right-to-work state like Arkansas and Iowa helps you making sure that the workers have a choice. If they want to, they can belong to the union, but they don't have to. And that's a tremendous asset that we have. Arkansas has, I think there's 27 states that have a right-to-work law protecting the Taft-Hartley Act at the national level, which Biden and the Democrats would like to repeal. That would be disastrous for the American economy and our competitive situation.
Governors, we've talked about fiscal deficits. Let's talk for a moment about our trade deficit. Over $1 trillion a year, including some $280+ billion in trade deficit with China. How does the next president address our foreign trade deficit?
Well, you got to do that. You got to look beyond China. China has obviously increased their manufacturing ever since that we gave them a normal trading relationship with the United States. During the Trump administration, we got in conflict with them. We raised tariffs on them, and that stymied some of the trading freedom that we had with that country. That market is not a right market for us now. We need to make sure we can get back to where we can trade agricultural products across the globe. And so I'm of the school that we can compete in America with our foreign competitors if you give us an even playing field in which we can compete. And so that's why we can produce steel in the United States of America. All of a sudden that helps us with our trade deficit. We're not importing steel. Whenever we're exporting agricultural products, that helps us with that trade imbalance. And we need to produce here from manufacturing. That's the key opportunity for us so that we can produce and we can export. And so we can challenge that. We can make a difference in reducing that trade deficit. Beyond China, we want to have fair competition. Europe, quite frankly, needs to open up more of their market to our agricultural products particularly. And so we've got to fight hard for that fair trade that benefits American workers and that allows us to export the products that we make in a competitive fashion.
Let me transition to a topic that I think is relevant both to our fiscal and to our trade deficits, and that is the status and the strength of the U.S. dollar. We, of course, have been the world's reserve currency for many decades, which is a source of fiscal security and strength. And yet there are countries around the world not just talking amongst themselves, but with each other about alternatives. There are experts that say that a threat to the U.S. dollar's reserve currency status is way off on the far horizon. There are those, though, in the digital era that say, no, the threats may be more imminent. How do you think about protecting the dollar's status around the world, and what does that mean in terms of our ability to manage our fiscal deficit and our trade deficits around the world?
The key to having the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency of the world is a stable economy in the United States of America, and to have a trust of the U.S. dollar. And that involves making sure that we can reduce our deficit that is out of control right now, that we can start balancing our budget that gives confidence to the world that we're managing our own economy. Secondly, it's important to build those relationships that give confidence to the U.S. as a trading country. And I'm talking about South America, that they are looking more to China. They're looking to India, and they do not see that they are obligated to the United States or want to have us as the number one partner. We need to rebuild those relationships and strengthen those, and that goodwill will help us to maintain the dollar. Secondly, you mentioned about the digital currency. And there are a number of countries, South Korea, Australia, the UK, that are piloting digital currencies. I'm opposed to moving that direction without congressional authorization. The Fed shouldn't do this on their own. It should be congressionally reviewed, and there's a lot of privacy concerns. There's some security concerns about that, and we do not want to do away with cash as a means of trading in the United States of America. People need to have that ability to say, I don't want to use a credit card, or I don't want to use a digital currency. I'm going to use our cash, and we need to keep that strong and that option there.
You made an excellent and important point on the role of Congress. And I want to turn your attention now to the role of Congress as it relates to the regulatory state. We've, as I had a chance to share with you, we surveyed our members, American Free Enterprise Chamber members, about what a legislative agenda should look like in the coming year. And what we heard back was we're more worried about regulation than what Congress is doing to us. We can't afford it. It's too complex. It's constantly growing. And so as we dug into that, we learned something interesting. The day that Bill Clinton, in I believe 1996, announced that the era of big government was over, I'm going to suggest to you that that was the last time that both major parties agreed that we had too much federal government. That day we had 9,200 federal regulations on the books. Today we have 120,000 federal regulations on the books. Republican presidents, Democratic presidents, there's not been a year since with fewer than 3,000 new final federal rules on the books. And that growth is done without Congress so many times. We've got agencies that are ignoring the will of Congress, that are in some cases ignoring the courts. How does the next president get the regulatory state under control?
Well, first of all, I agree with your businesses that this is one of the number one challenges that we face to economic growth in the United States of America. And whenever Bill Clinton was president, you said we ought to underscore that. 10,000 regulations then, and now over 120,000 regulations today. And so both Republican and Democrat administrations have responsibility for that growth. And also, I would add that when Bill Clinton was president and I was in the United States Congress is the last time we had a balanced budget at the federal level in our country. So maybe they're related. But in terms of what you do is you've got to take control of the administrative state. There's not going to be a regulation passed while I am president that is not reviewed and approved and evaluated by elected officials. By myself, by my administration. That's the role of the Office of Management and Budget, to have that regulatory review, and so we're going to make sure that works. Secondly, Congress does have a role, and Congress has a role because they have the ability to strike down regulations that go beyond their intent or does not is overly burdensome on the taxpayers, and they haven't utilized that sufficiently. But I hope that they are exercising that. But I'm not going to depend upon that. It's going to be my administration that reviews it. You look at, it took the United States Supreme Court to strike down the regulations of the EPA on waters of the U.S. that was really hurting our farmers and our small businesses. And the court said the administration, the administrative state, went beyond what Congress intended. The court struck it down. I want to make sure we strike it down and we follow those mandates from Congress in my administration.
Unfortunately, the waters of the U.S. decision has now been essentially circumvented by the EPA. The Farm Bureau spokesman, which just came out, said that they have a new waters of the U.S. rule that is unworkable, which farmers and businesses oppose. And they did that without the normal comment period by the people that are affected. So we have a great example of where the court struck down what they did, and they're still going ahead and trying to find a way to impose it, and doing it without even having input from the people that are affected. That, I think, really underscores how bad this situation is under the Biden administration.
Right, that's executive direction.
Right.
And so that's on President Biden, and that, in my administration, would have never happened.
Right.
Because you're going to follow the mandate of Congress, and you're not going to overburden our farmers and our businesses.
You know, one of the ideas that's been floated to address this question is to reverse the Congressional Review Act, so that new legislation over a certain economic impact has to have approval by Congress rather than the other way around. Today, the Congressional Review Act, of course, allows Congress the power to overturn a rule, but they don't have to approve them. Now, as president, is that something that, of course, that limits the executive's power? Where would you come down on that?
I would oppose that.
You would oppose that?
I like the way Congress has it, that if that they can overturn a regulation by an affirmative vote. But the approval process, you can see now how Congress has a hard time getting anything done.
Yes.
They have a hard time getting a budget done, which is their constitutional responsibility. They have a hard time agreeing upon legislation. I would hate to see, if I wanted to repeal Waters of the United States of America, that takes regulatory action. I don't want to have that repeal have to go to Congress, and particularly if it's a Democrat Congress or we don't have a supermajority, it'd never get done.
Yes.
So that reversal of policy would impact the turning back of oppressive Biden rules. No.
If you're elected president of the United States, you're running for re-election in 4 years. What should the American people expect? How should they measure you? How will their lives be better after 4 years of a Hutchinson presidency?
That's the right question, and a question every president should think about. But we should first of all be judged by what we commit to. And whenever I talk about reducing the regulatory state, when I talk about growing the private sector economy, when I talk about the free enterprise system, unleashing the energy of American business, you can judge that after 4 years. And you can look at our economy, you can look at the growth, you can look at the confidence of Americans in the economy that we have. But it's also about, after 4 years, I hope that the American people would say, we have a president that reflects our national character, that draws out the best of America, that draws out the best of our free enterprise system, of our freedoms in America, of our individual initiative and responsibility, and that they're looking out not just for themselves, but the common good as well. That, to me, is what makes our democracy work and function and makes it the greatest economy in the globe. Obviously, you have to look at where we are in terms of the world and our peace, and I think you'll see a stronger America. You'll see one in which our allies trust America and say their word is good, and they're looking out for freedoms not just in their country, but supporting their friends across the globe. And so that's what I hope that you see after 4 years, a president and a country that trusts their leaders, that has more confidence in American institutions and more confidence in our future.
Governor, thanks for a wonderful conversation today. As we've discussed, the next president has a mountain of challenges to put this country back on track. We're grateful that you're running. We're grateful that you took the time today. Thanks again to the folks at Readers for the opportunity to be here today in this fantastic location, the heart of American free enterprise, right here. I want to say that if you've liked what you've heard today and you want to learn more about Governor Hutchinson and his campaign, asa2024.com, asa2024.com. And you can find the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce at amfreechamber.com. Governors, again, thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
I'm honored to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with you again, Governor Hutchinson. Thank you.